So there's a new Scarlet and Violet DLC coming out called the Indigo Disc. I'd like to review it, but before that, I need to really give my review on the first DLC and the base game. I never did a video for them. I don't really feel like going back and doing a video for them. So we're going to do a real quick, easy review of these. That way you know where I stand with those games. First we have the base game, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. This game really infuriated me because it had a lot of really great ideas like the open world, but there's just so many design flaws and performance issues that bring it down. The game runs like shit, the story is just all over the place. So there's no level scaling, which kind of ruins the whole open world, and the area design is just really, really bad. I didn't really like Sword and Shield either, but compared to Sword and Shield, it really does feel worse. It's like a one step forward, two steps back situation. So I give the whole base game of Scarlet and Violet a 2 out of 5. Then we have the first DLC, the Teal Mask, and that DLC is pretty mind-numbingly boring. The game still performs like shit. Kitakami is a pretty bland and generic area, and the story doesn't do good standalone. It's supposed to be continued in the next DLC. Maybe the story will seem a lot better when we actually have its conclusion in the Indigo Disc, but there was nothing in the first half that got me interested in seeing the second part. There was one really interesting section with Blood Moon Ursaluna and his whole side quests, but the rest of the DLC is pretty boring, honestly. So I give that DLC a 1 out of 5. However, I am optimistic, and the reason why I had that optimism is because, well, I also didn't really like the first DLC for Sword and Shield, the Isle of Armor. It was kind of as bad as the Teal Mask was, but they went back with the Crown Tundra and they made it much better. Crown Tundra really added a lot of stuff that I thought was great. And honestly, if Sword and Shield had the entire quality that Crown Tundra had, the game would have been great. So I'm hoping that they pull a similar situation with this DLC. I'm going into it with an open mind, and I'm going to hope that it's really, really good and really blows me away.
6.5 hours later.
Now that I've finished the Indigo Disc DLC, I can say that it was indeed better than the first DLC. It wasn't quite on the level of Crown Tundra from Sword and Shield, but I still kinda enjoyed it. First, let's start with what's good about the Indigo Disc. The new area, Blueberry Academy, is pretty great. You have these 4 separate biomes, and they're all pretty diverse. And diverse biomes really lend themselves well to a Pokemon game because it gives you a larger variety of different Pokemon without any of them feeling really out of place. A couple of the new characters were good. Drayton in particular was really, really good. And I can mostly lend that to the fact that the writing for the whole DLC was actually pretty good and kind of funny. But Drayton just also has an interesting character and design to him. I also really like the Pokemon that they brought back for this DLC. There's a lot of fan favorites, including most legendaries and all of the previous starters. But the DLC is not all good. In fact, it's mostly not good. For starters, let's talk with the performance. Somehow the performance in the new area is worse than in the base game. Within the opening cutscene of the area, as the camera's panning over the whole zone, I'm getting graphical glitches, and the performance slows down to a crawl many times. Especially in the ice area where the weather effects will slow things down so significantly that it actually makes the game difficult to play. There's also some new gym trials before the new Elite Four, and those are just as bad as the ones in the base game, except for Drayton's. Drayton's really made me rethink how the trials should have all been. This trial forces you to use different Pokemon than you might have normally used, which is a really great idea, and if all the trials in the entire game had been like that, well, it would have just been way better. But the other 3 are still really bad and a big waste of time. There's also a lot of Pokemon that feel like they were just kind of randomly thrown around. You have these biomes, but if the second you step into one, you kind of see 20 different Pokemon around you, and that tends to be 90% of the Pokemon that you're going to see in that biome. There are very few areas where it's like you explore and your reward is seeing a unique area with unique Pokemon. There's maybe like 1 or 2 caves around. And then there's the story. I complimented the writing because it had some funny and well-written dialogue, but the story itself really doesn't go anywhere. It kind of feels like they're building up to something and suddenly it hard turns in a random direction and then ends. It's like they had an idea for the ending, but they couldn't figure out how to get there. And really, I started to notice a pattern with a lot of my issues in the DLC. They're all problems I had with the base game as well. Pretty much every issue I had with this DLC is just a case of them not bothering to fix actual issues that the base game had. And they could have fixed these issues because they weren't that significant. Like many DLCs where you can tell the developers actually listened to the players' feedback of the base game and took that into account when adding new content to their games. I even felt like I saw some of that with the Crown Tundra DLC from Sword and Shield, so I know Game Freak can do it. but they really didn't do it with the Indigo disc, and it feels really half-assed. So I give Indigo disc the same score that I gave the base game, a 2 out of 5. I should also note the post-game that the Indigo disc has. I haven't gotten too deep into it yet, but just from a quick initial play, it seems very, very grindy. They advertised all these starters and legendaries you can attain, but you need tons of grinding to unlock the starters. I grinded quite a significant amount just to unlock the starters in one of the biomes, but the other 3 I'm still working on. I don't think that'll affect my score of it too much though. That's it for the review. Don't bother liking or subscribing to the video. What I really want you to do is to check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/LanceJ. The link's in the description. Come in there and you can argue with me in person about whether or not you agree with my review.